Well, I'm super excited to talk to Venice Allan today. Venice, I have been looking forward to talking to you for a while, and our schedules just haven't connected, but finally, yay.
Yay.
And one
Thank
of
you
the
so
reasons,
much for having me on your podcast.
yeah, thank you. And one of the things that I didn't even realize until a couple of days ago is that you actually were one of the witnesses, not witnesses, listeners. I'm not sure what the term is. Somebody who got to go into Keira Bell's hearing and just, I guess, be a witness to what was happening. What is the appropriate term I'm looking for?
I was just a member of the public in the public gallery.
And did you have to
Um,
apply to get in there, or was it sort of
no,
first come, first serve?
yeah, I mean anyone can go in the public gallery at a trial, but because of COVID, there are fewer places. They actually had to have 3 courts,
Oh, wow.
and the journalists and the public were all in one. And I think they let a few more in than they were planning, but it was fine.
Well, and it's so important to have people in there to sort of to watch what's happening and to be able to
Mm.
relate what's happening. And actually, I got in touch with you because I wanted to interview you about your speeches that you've been doing at the public park in
Mm.
England. So I'm not sure which of those you want to talk about first, but
Just ask me
they're
anything,
both
it's fine.
awesome.
So, yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm not the greatest expert on Keira Bell's court case because I just went in there in the public gallery for one day, the second day of the judicial review. And it was quite difficult because of COVID and it was in a different court. It's a bit like this, really. You're looking at a little tiny screen. But yeah, it was really interesting to see what they were talking about and how I didn't see Keira's testimony. I saw mainly the Tavistock's defence, and it was really quite extraordinary listening to them talking about children having agency and being able to make such huge decisions about their future, about their sex lives and their fertility and having children, you know, when they're as young as 10. I mean, it's really shocking that anyone thinks that's okay.
Did
But
they at all admit that they don't really know the long-term consequences of these interventions?
I mean, that was obviously brought up. I don't know if they actually admitted that. I mean, there aren't any studies, are there? It's just so
No.
scary. I can't believe that they're doing it and they're carrying on doing it. It's really shocking.
And I actually saw an interview that you did with Posey right
Mm.
after you came out of the hearing, and
Yeah,
you did not sound optimistic about the outcome.
I don't really, because a lot of what they were talking about. I mean, there's a possibility that they will stop puberty blockers for under 16s or under 15s, I think, which would be good. But the majority of the kids who are a majority of girls who are taking puberty blockers, I think that the average is around 15 and a half. And so it would only save those girls probably will still want to do it in 6 months' time, wouldn't they? So we need to stop these treatments completely, especially for under 18s. But their argument is because you can get married and have a baby at 16, you should be able to decide that you never want to have a baby. I don't see that logic. And they don't let young women have hysterectomies for any other reason, do they?
Right. I was going to say, because when I was in high school, I asked my doctor to tie my tubes because at the time I
Really?
was absolutely convinced that I did not want kids. I didn't like kids at all when I was in high school. And then they said no. And I'm really thankful they said no. Because I have 3 beautiful children that I wouldn't have
Yeah.
if the doctor had done that. And I, of course, at the time thought I was very informed and I knew what I was doing. And so there really is a maturing that happens between, 15, 16 and 25.
Yeah. And one of the great characteristics of a teenager is that you feel more confident in yourself and your decisions than at any other time in your life, probably.
And it's
And
probably the time in your life where you're least likely to really have a good handle because you've got all
yeah,
sorts of things going on in your life that are causing it. It's hard to know what you
I
really
mean, the Tavistock were basically saying that if a child understood how babies were made and what an erection was or what an orgasm was, if they understood what those things meant, then they were old enough to make those decisions. It's just extraordinary.
Well, especially considering, I mean, some of us were sexually active at that age, but a lot of these children have not been sexually active.
Mm,
And so they're making decisions about their sexuality and their fertility that really they have no conception of. I mean,
none at all.
and so you don't feel like the courts are likely to just ban these treatments?
Oh, I'm not the expert on this, but I think I think it will be the start of the journey. Hopefully something will be achieved here, but I don't think it's the end. You know, it's one battle, not the war.
Right. And hopefully there will be other strong women and possibly boys and men that come forward who have been
Yeah.
harmed by this. I mean, this
I
is,
mean,
it seems to me like in the US, we're actually going younger than in the
yeah.
UK. We've got kids as young as 8 years old who are, they're being put on cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers at the same time. So my question is it potential that Tavistock will say, okay, we won't put them on puberty blockers, but we'll still continue to put children on cross-sex hormones?
Oh no, in this country you can't go on cross-sex hormones on the NHS. I'm not sure if with private doctors, but the NHS won't put you on cross-sex hormones until 16
Oh,
already.
that's good. Okay.
Because I think that's the reason it's not so well. I think there's several reasons why it's worse in the US than it is here. I think firstly because it started in the US, so it's been going on longer, and secondly because of our public health, because the NHS guides all the private healthcare as well in this country, and most people use the NHS. I think that gives the system more control, which if there's loads and loads of private practitioners, you don't have that control, do you?
Right.
So,
And the motivation is a little different. We have big pharma that is actually giving funding school counselors to go in and spread this message and basically recruit children. And the doctors are making huge amounts of money here in the US,
yeah,
which probably isn't happening as much in the UK.
exactly, because if you work for the NHS, you just get paid a salary, and obviously I think that doctors do get given gifts and holidays and all kinds of things from pharmaceutical companies. It doesn't actually alter their salary. They're not getting paid per patient in a way that a private doctor would, or a doctor that's working with health insurers. You know, it's a completely different system, and I think that does protect kids. I know that from something I read, I think that there's more trans kids, let's call that, you know, what they call trans kids in LA County than there is in the whole of the UK right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a problem where you are, but nothing like, I mean,
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
I'm in this conservative state in Utah, and last I heard 500 girls were getting either cross-sex hormones or puberty blockers at the University of Utah.
In
That was
Utah.
last year. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was a huge jump from the year before, and we don't have statistics for this year.
And like you say, it's not a progressive state. It's not the kind of place. Didn't you have quite a good congressman or senator in Utah
Yeah,
who
we
was
have,
help?
we have
Yeah, who's quite
tried.
on the side. Yeah.
Right. And we tried to pass some legislation, and then that turned out to be a fiasco because the sponsor of the legislation here in Utah, it turns out that his sister is married to a trans identified man and has a nephew, niece, that is trans identifying. And instead of introducing the legislation which we wanted, which was to stop these treatments, he
Yeah.
introduced legislation to study them,
Uh,
which is just, it's a waste of money. We know that these are harmful interventions. So that was
yeah.
disappointing. But so we won't know the outcome of Keira's case for a while.
No, the three judges go away and research it, I guess, and consider all the evidence, and then write a report, a statement. But I think whatever happens, it's really great that this case has happened, because it's, you know, for so long, I'm sure it's the same in the States. We hear this story all the time, this reversible treatment, and I think hopefully this case is going to start making people realize that puberty blockers aren't reversible. Of course they're not. You know, they're only reversible if they're used for a short period of time in childhood.
Well, and
You know,
even
like
then, I mean, you're
for
inducing
precocious puberty, I mean.
right. Yeah, you're inducing a developmental delay in adolescence. I mean, there's no
Exactly.
way
And
you can reverse that.
and then once you've become an adult, you're not going to be able to have that puberty again. It's just it just seems absolutely insane to me. It always has, and I can't believe they get away with constantly saying on television, in the press, that they're reversible, when it really doesn't look like that at all. It's, you know, it's the same way that they lie about the suicide statistics, the same way they lie about, you know, problems arising from men in women's spaces. It's the same thing. It's just all lies, and it's so frustrating, isn't it, to hear it?
Well, and that's something I kind of wanted to explore with you, that there's sort of been a raising of awareness among those of us who are concerned about this movement, trying to figure out what kind of language to use when we talk about these things. Because if we talk about transgender people, then we're suggesting there is such a thing as someone who is a transgender person. If we talk about gender dysphoria, we're buying into a diagnosis that relies on regressive stereotypes. So
Absolutely.
what kind of language do you use, and when you talk about these things, and would you like to see other people using?
I think we just have to be really clear with our language, and just try and be as truthful with our language as possible. So when we're talking about men, we call them men, and when we're talking about teenage girls, we're talking about teenage girls, and we're not getting involved with this whole, you know, men, you know, this complete reversal of the language. Because although we understand this idea of a trans woman or a trans man, we understand what they're trying to say, the average person doesn't even understand that. They don't know whether it's a man who's identifying as a woman or a woman identifying as a man. So I think it's really simple, just to stick with people's actual biological sex, you know. And if we have to describe men who are pretending to be the opposite sex, then that's what we should call them, men who are pretending to be the opposite sex. I think Julia Long had a better one. It was like men who try to force us into pretending that they're the opposite sex. But it does get quite long. So
Yeah,
men,
and that's part of the problem. Is I usually say men who claim to believe they feel like women,
yeah,
which is
it's just
a
too much, isn't it?
mouthful. Yeah, exactly.
I think, you know, I disagree with some people about language, because also I think when we're having a conversation with somebody, when I speak to anyone, I try and use the language that they understand. So if somebody's using cis and trans, you know, maybe I will use their language, but make them aware that I'm using their language, if you know what I mean.
Right, and that's important, I think, because if you're trying to change minds, we have to speak in a way that they even understand what we're talking about.
That we understand, but at the same time is honest. So yeah, I think it's really important in this day and age where everything is being flipped on its head and turned upside down and back to front, that we just try and always stop, be calm, and really consider what we're trying to say, and try and be as clear as possible.
So just out of curiosity, how did you even get involved in this? Because most of us sort of, this was, it hasn't been something that has taken up much of our life until recently. So how did you get involved?
Same, yeah. I mean, to cut a long story short, I heard about the arguments in around 2015, and I thought it was all a little bit abstract. I understood the arguments, and I guess I was, or you know, as soon as I heard, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm a TERF, you know, like that sounds sensible. But I didn't really see that it was going to become so important. And then I was very involved in left-wing politics at the time, so I thought it would be a good idea to try and bring this issue up in my local group, Labour Party group. And I was just, you know, it was really like, if this conversation was acceptable and we could just have it, then I think I would have just had a conversation and walked away. But it's the hostility and aggression that you meet when you start talking about it, which really makes you think, okay, this is really worth investigating, you know? And so we tried to organize a group where we had people from both sides discussing these changes to the law, these proposed changes to the Gender Recognition Act. And it was just, it's a long story, but it basically ended up at Speaker's Corner with Maria McLaughlin getting punched to the ground, her camera being smashed, you know, receiving within that 24 hours around that meeting, receiving death threats, bomb threats, just, you know, terrible things that, and I was just an ordinary member of the community, you know, I was just a mother who was concerned about these laws, and the impact that they would have on women and children. And as soon as as soon as that happened, I became very scared at first, but that also made me very angry. And I thought, well, you know, this is really exposing what this is all about, because this isn't normal. So then I just thought, well, we need to keep having more of these talks. We need to talk about it within our political parties, within our local communities. And I'm going to do whatever I can to make that conversation happen. So that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years. We started off doing like these panel meetings around the country for a year or two. And then again, you know, just at the third meeting that I did in the north of England was with Sheila Jeffries and Linda Bellos were on the panel. And then this really stalkerish guy who had been sort of saying, you know, lies about me on Twitter, that I was a Nazi and stuff like that. He actually brought a private prosecution case to court against Linda Bellos and I for something that she'd said. She'd said in the talk, if any of those, because it was just a few weeks after Maria had been punched, and she said, you know, if any of those bastards comes anywhere near me, I will take my glasses off. And then she said something like, you couldn't even hear it on the tape. It was like, oh, I'll hit them, or something like that. And so then this stalker guy, tried to get the police to interview us. They did interview Linda, but they said no, there was no proof of her committing a public order offence. And then the police didn't even come to interview me, because what he was trying to get me on was malicious communications, just for live streaming her saying this. And anyway, then he did a private prosecution and took us to court. But then the Crown Prosecution Service, we had very good lawyers working for us pro bono because of the issue, and they managed to, it didn't even get heard in court, that the CPS threw it out. Again, that just made me more determined, more angry, and more determined to, because I felt at the time, in this country anyway, this whole conversation about transgenderism versus women's rights hadn't really come out. And so even when there was an example of this very dangerous man in a Scottish prison in 2017 who had, I think he's the most dangerous prisoner in the whole of the UK, and he's identifying as a woman, and wanted to go to a women's prison. I'm not sure if he did in the end. I think he did go into the women's prison. And then there was, you know, it was very similar to the Karen White story, but it was a year before, but it barely got any coverage. You know, that was the situation in 2017 when I did the first meeting. And then fast forward to now, you know, these things can't go under the radar anymore, can they? Because there's so many people interested in it, and there's a lot of high profile people who've spoken out, like J.K. Rowling and people like that. So they can't get away with it anymore.
But it's still shocking to me. I don't know if you just saw Margaret Atwood signed on to this letter of support for transgender rights.
Did she do that? She's done some stuff in the past. Has she done something recently as well?
Yeah, I believe so. I just saw a bunch of posts about it, and it's just so disheartening to me that we have, you know, arguably very strong women who are suggesting that men's feelings are more important than women's rights and protections. And I just cannot fathom, you know, here you have this man who's pressing a suit against you, basically for suggesting you'll protect yourself if attacked.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, yeah, and she's, you know, she's in her 60s, Linda, you know, and I think one of the reasons it got chucked out was because it's like, you're trying to say that this was an attack on you, but you were scouring the internet looking for it, posting it on the internet. So if it's so terrible, why are you posting it? It's, you know, luckily, so I mean, we've had several court cases around transgenderism in the UK now. There was Kate Scotto was actually convicted of hate speech for something that she said to that terrible serial litigant guy. He's a bit like it's like the British version of Jonathan Yaniv, you know, always taking people to court for something. But she got convicted. But apart from her, then Maya Forstater, she had the employment tribunal, which she unfortunately lost. But again, that's what got J.K. Rowling involved. So even when we lose these cases, it still generates so much publicity that they're worth doing. But other cases, you know, like in our situation, the judge was quite sensible about it. So, you know, hopefully,
were you there a couple weeks ago when Posey and some others were arrested?
I didn't go up there. No, I wasn't involved in that event. I was going to go up, and then personal stuff happened. But yeah, that was unbelievable, using COVID laws
to try and silence women, basically.
Yeah.
So for those, go ahead.
Yeah. No, tell me.
For those who are not familiar with the Speaker's Corner, because that's something we don't have here in the U.S. And I'm assuming that's something for anybody.
I think you do have some.
Do we?
I think if you look up Speaker's Corner US, there are actually historical ones in America.
Oh, okay. Maybe it's because I live in sort of the West, where, you know, it sort of came after all that. So can you explain sort of what the Speaker's Corner is and what you've been doing there? Because
yeah, sure.
And I'll link to some of the videos because you've made some incredibly powerful speeches.
Oh, thanks. Well, Speaker's Corner is a spot in central London. It's a corner of Hyde Park, and it is the actual site where 400 years ago it was the gallows. So before you were hanged, you were allowed a final speech.
Oh, wow.
And
wow, the power of that imagery with so many of the images that the trans activists use women hanging.
Yeah, and The Handmaid's Tale, they're hanged, are they? So the tradition started around your final speech, and great, you know, in those days, great crowds would come and watch the hangings. And then even when the gallows moved further east in the city, the tradition of speech making on that spot remained, and it remains till this day. So a lot of our rights and laws were gained there. Huge, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in the 19th century gathered there. At the turn of the 20th century, the suffragettes gathered there in huge numbers to protest. And there used to be Speaker's Corners all around the country, but that's the only one that remains to this day. I think after the advent of television and cinema, a lot of the other kind of traditional spots for public speaking closed, were no longer used. But for some reason in Hyde Park in London, it's remained. So it's only kind of used as a speech making place on a Sunday afternoon. And every Sunday, even throughout the whole lockdown and everything, every Sunday without fail, there is some people there talking. So people go on a step ladder and just talk. And it's really quite a wonderful place. The sort of rules of social engagement there are very different than anywhere else I've ever been. And when we met in 2017, when Maria was assaulted, we were just meeting there as a meeting point in order to go onto a building. And it was on a Wednesday evening, so there were no other speakers around. We just happened to meet at that spot. But then it became it became like we would go back every year after that, on that day, to sort of remember what happened and to, you know, to meet up and discuss what we were going to do in the future. And then this year, with all this censorship, I think what happened with Posey and I was, you know, Posey's pretty much banned on every platform now. Even on Facebook, her Posey Parker account has gone. So we just were so sick of this censorship. We've both been banned on Twitter for years. And we thought we really need to get back out there in real life, into real life space. All this talking, I mean, even our previous meetings in hotel conference rooms, the panel events, that also had that same idea, that all this talking online, getting banned, getting censored, we need to take it back to real life because that's where things happen. But then this year decided to actually join in that tradition of Speaker's Corner, and say our things that we can't say online anymore. And it's been brilliant. It's been so much fun. We've had quite a lot of people come. We're engaging the other people that are already at the corner, because it's mainly men who go and talk there on Sundays, a lot of religious men. And yeah, so they all quite like having more women there. The police love us being there, because up until the last one in London where the BLM supporters came along, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a minute, you know, there hasn't been any trouble. I don't think the trans activists, we've had like anti-feminists, there's a lot of anti-feminists there anyway, so we've had people shouting about abortion and stuff, but they're just heckling, really. They're not trying to shut us down or beat us up or anything.
You haven't had a strong showing of trans activists.
No, they wouldn't dare. That's what I'm trying to say, because if they came along, they would just get shouted and laughed out of there, you know, because all those men who are there, the anti-feminists, the Christians, the Muslims, the Orthodox Jews, they all know what a woman is. And they also, all the people that go there every Sunday, everyone who goes there is passionate about free speech. So the idea that you would hit a woman for something that she was saying, you know, they wouldn't stand for that. But what happened about, I can't remember how long ago it was now, about a month ago, it was the 30th of August. So we did just a normal event, and then we'd finished talking, and then suddenly this big group of Black Trans Lives Matter group with trans signs and everything came towards us. And yeah, I don't know how
pretty intense. I saw some of the video, and it looked a little scary.
Yeah, it wasn't that scary. I think some women were scared, because some women who come to our things, you know, we've got the COVID thing going on at the moment, so a lot of people are wearing masks. They're scared of being too close to people. And what happened was a lot of the marchers came along, and then we were kind of pushed against the wall. So I was there trying to push people back, you know, so to protect the women behind me, some of whom were elderly, some were just didn't like the confrontation. I personally really enjoyed the confrontation, because, you know, at first it was quite, but then they went off eventually, and then some women came back, and we had a heated conversation. We had several heated conversations, and it was frustrating because we weren't agreeing with each other, but it didn't feel scary at all. But then these two women, I think they were women with masks on and stuff, came along and took our sign and ripped that up, and that was a bit, that, you know, for a minute it was like,
so it's discouraging that the women were the ones who were coming after you, and not, that's something.
Well, there's a lot of women who feel very passionately about all this, you know. Yeah, it is discouraging that when women are so passionately on the trans side, but we know that, don't we? And we know that there is a big generational difference. While some of the women who were on our side were young, most of us were middle-aged.
So what do you think that is? Because that's something that's confounded me, to have, it's not just that they support transgender rights, they can be even more passionate about it than people who are actually transgender, these so-called feminists. And I can't wrap my head around it at all. Do you have any insights?
I think they've just been missold feminism, haven't they, since they were little girls. You know, when I kind of came of age at the end of the 90s, suddenly there was this new kind of feminism around, which I kind of missed me by, I think. It was just the generation younger than me. where suddenly it was really feminist to be really sexy and powerful, and that being a woman was about being feminine. The feminism, I've even had some of them say, feminism is my right to be feminine. You're like, what are you talking about? They just don't know. Like these girls at the march, the Black Trans Lives Matter protesters, they were like, had all the language of oppression and but they didn't seem to know what they were talking about. And
I mean,
we were like, why are women oppressed?
Yeah.
Why are women oppressed? And they were like, oh, because of the gender pay gap. And you're like, no, but why are women paid differently? They just didn't get it.
They're standing up for the rights of men who are impersonating women. Like,
I know, but they just don't see it like that.
How is it that that's where I guess maybe if we can figure out how to get through to that, because I've had one of my first exposures to this, and I was oblivious. I had no idea when somebody said trans women are women. I was like, what?
Yeah.
Or trans men or whatever they said. I honestly thought it was a joke because it was ridiculous. And I kind of pushed back on it, and I'm like, well, no.
No.
I mean, and yet, and these were probably younger women, probably in their 20s or 30s, and they lashed out at me with a vengeance that I have not felt probably from any other group. This, yes, they are, yes, they're women, yes, they're women, and I can't figure out what the motivation might be for these, and it just hard. It's so sad to me to think it's almost like we have all these young women who think they're feminists who are actually men's rights activists. I mean, it's very sad.
It's so scary. It's really sad, and it's horrible. The way I see it, Erin, is that this transgenderism stuff, it can't last forever, because what we're saying is true. We're not making it up. It's true. So women will get assaulted in women-only spaces. Teenagers will regret what they're doing. Grown-up men will regret what they're doing. And unfortunately, I see it playing, it's going to have to play out that way. I hope not. And,
and the fact that you get banned from social media, and yet you have trans people saying horrible, horrible things.
Awful.
Awful, horrible things.
Actual threats. And there's not a problem with that. It just feels like with all of this stuff, it just feels like we've just ended somewhere around 2001 or something, or 2005. We just went through the looking glass, and now we're just seeing everything all around us, what the result of that is.
And it's so sad to me, because I have I've lost a lot of friends because they see me as this hateful Nazi. And it's so confusing to me, because suddenly standing up for women and girls' rights is considered hateful.
Yeah. And I think it is a lot worse in the States, because at least here we have kind of built a movement which is across all the political parties, including quite a lot of voices on the left, whereas I'm just not seeing it happening in the Democrats.
No, and that's the hard part, is that it's like the Democrats have completely, Joe Biden has said that his number one civil rights issue is trans rights. And I'm like, well, what about all those kids who are being locked in cages on the border? What happened to them? What happened to the rights of children not to be sex trafficked? There are so many issues to me.
Teenage pregnancies and Black Lives Matter. And then you're talking about, and it all becomes about trans.
Right. And oftentimes, it's a lot of these men who are impersonating women. They come from, I don't want to say privileged backgrounds, because that's buying into that whole narrative, but they're well-educated, middle-class white men.
Some of them are, yeah. A lot of them are. But then a lot of them are just really lost, unhappy men from all kinds of backgrounds. And it's a terrible lie to tell children, vulnerable adults, everyone.
Well, and it does seem like you're ahead of it, because it sounds to me like in some ways the UK was pushing this a little bit harder in the schools, but now they're pulling back somewhat. Do you get a sense that you're making headway?
Oh, definitely, yeah. The tide has definitely turned here. Ordinary people always agreed, didn't they? I think I was trying to say this earlier, and then I kind of lost my thread. I think the fact is that it was quite a good campaign to work on, because most people had never thought about it. And so if you could get in there first and say, well, you've never really thought about this, but hey, what about how this could affect this, and how trans rights affect women's rights? People are like, yeah. And then hearing about children getting treatments, people are like, what? You know?
Well, and I don't know if you get this, but when I bring it up, people say it doesn't happen. They just historically say that doesn't happen. You're making it up. And so
I know, but it does happen, and there's evidence that it happens, and it's been in our papers a lot. You know, there's been, you know, the Times has been fantastic. The Times and the Sunday Times has really gone on and on about this for 3 years. And so that's why the trans activists, you know, they call us TERF Island, and they say that our media is transphobic. It's not, it's just honest. And even our left-wing media has had to concede a lot of ground. And I don't know. I think it's easier to kind of access the media and the politicians in this country because we're a smaller country. Everything is in London. You know, London is the centre in a way that DC, or, you know, you got so many cities, so many centres, that it's perhaps it's easier here.
Yeah, it's probably, it's just, I'm thinking about, I don't know how big England compares to just Utah, the state I live in.
It's probably smaller, I don't know.
Smaller. And so even just traveling, because if we want to try and, you know, I'm the only one that I know of within a 50-mile radius of where I am who's doing any of this, because we have such big spaces here. So it is easier for you all to get like a critical mass.
And is it true to say maybe that the average person is maybe more politically engaged here and more likely to read a newspaper, you know, be engaged in these kind of social political issues maybe than in the States? Because I feel like there's probably loads of Americans who don't go along with it, but maybe they just don't care enough to oppose it,
or they don't have any clue what's really going on. I mean, because the media here has been terrible about coverage. When I went and testified at the state legislature here, they said that a few people from a hate group testified against. And I'm like, you know, that was before. I mean, I came totally. I had no idea there were other people even involved in this. I went completely on my own, and the media just will not cover it. And there's been a few times where I've sort of engaged with a reporter, and then at some point they'll say, oh, you're just one of those transphobes. And
it's really bad, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think what needs to happen here in the US in order for us to make headway is for the LGBT population, just the LGBs, to start standing up. Because I think until that happens, anyone who stands up against it is just considered transphobic.
I also think maybe it's got something to do with the entrenched culture wars that you have as well, right?
So you don't have that much there?
No, they're kind of trying to import it from the US with these kind of issues, but I think it's been around a longer time, so that these socially conservative family kind of ideas are seen as a very kind of Christian conservative thing. And conservatism has a movement in America, which people who are not in that movement very much want to disassociate themselves from. Whereas perhaps here, it's not so, you know, so people are kind of feel more able to say, no, that's wrong. A lot of people aren't. You know, I was chucked out of the Labour Party, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying it's perfect here, but, you know, it does seem that more people are not so scared of saying no. Because just because I think transgenderism is an abomination, I fully support, you know, gay rights, lesbian rights, abortion rights. You know, those two things don't have to be connected. Whereas when you have President Trump tweeting about the trans in the military and stuff like that, that got the left-wing people much more pro-trans.
Right. Anything that President Trump is for is evil in the eyes
Yeah,
of the left. And so if
exactly.
yeah, and such a good target. So in a way, I think having President Trump stand up against the trans issues has actually probably hurt the efforts
Possibly, yeah.
because they're just associated with, evil red
Yeah,
orange.
yeah. Well, it's very much an identity. There seem to be these very different identities, don't there, in America, between the coastal people, big cities, and more rural people in the flyover country, like, so
Well,
I
and
don't
the
know.
interesting thing is that those who have aligned them or have been willing to accept the platforms given by the Christian right have been really have been attacked on some level
Demonized, yeah.
by the left. And so,
Mhm.
people like Miriam Ben Shalom and I
Mm.
believe that Julia Long, some really strong women who have agreed to appear with Christian conservatives on this issue have really been attacked. And
Yeah, it
so,
wasn't even Julia Long didn't even when we went to the States last January, we literally sat in the room, me, Julia, and Posey.
mhm,
We were nothing to do with that meeting. We were literally going there to support Julia Beck and Kara Dansky, who was speaking on behalf of Wolf. Yet somehow, even us just going to the Heritage Foundation, we got the cooties. We got your. I only learned that day that I went to the Heritage Foundation. I heard the word cooties for the first time, and I got them that day too.
yeah, and I think that I don't know what advice you have for us here in the States. If you have any insight.
Well, my big advice for American women when this COVID stuff, I mean, we're not even going to talk about that, but once if that ever ends, then you have to use your public libraries, because the thing is, in America, you do have freedom of speech as part of your constitution, and you have to fight for that. And you need to, you know, you can have a free public meeting in any public library, and you need to do that in every city, every town in America, where there are women, and women need to travel to support those other women. And because I really think getting together in real life, and it really helps. I think as far as we're fighting these wars on these social media platforms that are owned and moderated by men, we're never going to have a fair hearing, are we? Because we don't even know how they mess around with the algorithms, and it's not just getting banned and content taken down, is it?
It's that shadow burning or yeah, I mean, that whole content that they don't like sort of getting buried.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it happens all the time. We know that. So I think my advice to American women is the advice to women everywhere, which is just get out in real life and and
And
make people
be willing,
see,
yeah, be willing to be attacked.
challenge all those lies,
Yeah.
challenge all those lies that they peddle about suicide, about children, about women's spaces, because they are lying and we are telling the truth, and it is simple as that. And
Right. And we have
I think
science behind us. That's the thing that just is
yeah,
astonishing to me is that the
but
left
they've
historically is always talking about science. And in this case, they just have blown their credibility with this whole movement because it's so clear that they're just ignoring science.
It totally is. But science science doesn't mean anything anymore.
That's true. Yeah.
Sex is not binary. It's a spectrum.
So
That's
as we're
that's what
finishing
we're
up,
dealing with. It's lies.
it's
So
lies. Yeah.
exactly. That's why I think real life, and also I think what's really good about doing these events is that I think those violent trans activists really do help trans people. You want to see these men that are trying to pretend that they're women. They are the worst. And when they come out and picket our meetings and intimidate people, that gets more people interested.
Yeah, when you
You
have
have to,
6 foot men dressed in dresses and makeup, calling someone like me a cunt, um,
yeah,
it's
it
kind
doesn't help
of,
their cause.
yeah, it doesn't go over well. And to see that, I think, um, it really sort of shows where this is coming from, that
Absolutely.
this isn't about
Human rights.
yeah, this is not about human rights. This is
It's not about rights.
it's
It's
about
about
bullying.
domination, about male domination.
Yeah, and people, yeah, it's really so as we're finishing up, do you have any exciting things happening in your area that you want to talk about?
It's all the exciting thing today is we're waiting to hear from our Prime Minister to find out what we're not allowed, all the new COVID
Oh,
laws.
the new COVID.
Yeah, we just
so that's where getting together is hard, because we're trying to get legislation passed here in the US, and to do that we need to have witnesses, and if we're not able to travel, then it really limits our ability to stand up against this.
Yeah,
so
it does. Yeah, and I guess for you it's going to be the major thing is who gets elected in November as well, right?
Yeah, and I just
in terms of trans and COVID.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, and just I can't even. I spend so much time just in angst about the election this year. I can't stand it. I can't stand the fact.
I think we should shield both of them and get some new ones.
Exactly. And I'm like,
they're both definitely at risk.
How on earth did we get to the point that Joe Biden is representing this this party that is supposed to represent diversity and inclusion? We have Joe Biden. How do we?
I know. I never heard anyone say anything good about him other than that he's not Trump.
Right, exactly. He's not Trump, and that's
it.
Not Trump. But the fact that he's come out to say that he 100% supports this lie. I mean, how do you feel good about voting for someone who is endorsing such a harmful lie? I mean, it just.
I know.
Anyway, that's my angst.
Yeah, I don't blame you. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
And it's been lovely speaking to you.
Yeah, it's been so good speaking with you, and I'm just so grateful for your efforts.